I'm Jonah Buchanan, and in this video we're going to look at the two new sampler options within Logic Pro 10.5. There are two separate plugins, and we're going to have a look at them both within this video. So first things first, we're going to start by looking at the Quick Sampler. This is designed to be a rapid way to take any audio file, get it into a sampler, and allow you to start working with it quickly. And what I've done here is to open the loop browser and to identify a beat loop. I don't really like the beat loop itself, but I do like the sounds that are contained within it. And what I want to be able to do is to map it to a keyboard as quickly as I can so that I can then start using the samples without actually having to use the pattern. So the pattern sounds like this. Okay, so I've got these individual hits that I like, but not so much the pattern. So what I could do, or what I would normally have to do, would be to set up the sampler that I might want to use in advance. But actually, Logic's new samplers allow me simply to drag and drop from this part of the area here, the loop browser, and I can take this over to this new area. And if I drag it actually onto the track header, you can see that I can take this sample directly into the Quick Sampler, either the original version of this or the optimized. We'll come back to that in a moment. I could take it into Drum Machine Designer or into various algorithms within Alchemy. What I want to do is to take it into the optimized version of the Quick Sampler. I'm going to drop it there, and what Logic will do is automatically scan this file for me, and as you can see, what it's done is by default it's sliced it. I've got a number of options here at the top, and the one that it's picked automatically is to slice it, which means that straight away it's gone through, detected where the transients are within this loop, and you can see underneath each individual slice that it's mapped each one to the next key. So what I've now got is the option just to play the individual parts of this sample straight away. So you can see Quick Sampler lives up to its billing straight away. Very quickly, what it's done is to allow us to take a loop, which obviously is a couple of seconds in duration, and slice it up into all these tiny little chunks, which allow me then to play with those in turn. And that's really nice. But of course, I can go further. So let's have a look at the interface more broadly. What I've got here, firstly, is these different modes. We've already seen slice mode. Classic mode simply maps the sample across the entire key range. So if I was to play it on C3, we'll hear the whole loop. And similarly, if I play it an octave lower, we'll hear it at half speed. And at double speed, an octave higher. So far, so straightforward. We've also got one-shot mode, which I won't demonstrate because it will play the entire loop, but it will play it from start to finish with me just having to trigger one key, or we can come back into slice mode as before. So that's nice. You can see then that I've got a range of options here. You can see that it's been detected from the transient markers as we discussed before, so it's gone through and it's looked for all of the sharp start points for each individual sound. And what I can do as well, sort of after the effect, is I can go through and change the sensitivity of this. So if Logic has sort of overanalyzed, if it's put slices where I don't need them, I can drop the sensitivity, and you can see the number of zones that are created as a result are fewer. But this kind of super sensitive approach has served us really well here. We can also set the start key where we want it to, the first sample to be mapped, and we can select whether or not we want it to be mapped chromatically thereafter, and that's nice. One thing I particularly like, if I select one slice, here, I have a chance to turn on flex editing for that individual sample. And at the moment, you can see it's playing back at normal or at least 1 time speed. But if I want to, I could take this down to a quarter speed. And I get this kind of super glitchy effect that we're used to using flex editing in Logic whenever processing audio files. Here's an 1/8 speed. So if I wanted to, I could create these sort of drawn-out individual hits, which I think is a really nice feature. Underneath that, I've then got a sort of synth engine, which is a little bit pared down, but it's still giving me plenty of options. I've got LFOs, which I can route into particular areas. So here's LFO 1. I can choose its speed here. I can sync it to tempo if I want to, choose a waveform for it. And then what I can do is to select the amount that I want to use, and I can specify a target. So if I wanted to create for instance, some vibrato, I could select pitch as my target, select the amount that I wanted, and if I want to, I can use a VIA control to maybe, for example, map the velocity to that, or the mod wheel if I wanted. So that's a nice way of just being able to sort of set an amount a target and a controller if necessary to control this a little bit. And of course, what I've also got are dedicated envelopes for different sections. So I've got a filter section here. This is a filter from Alchemy, and I've got various modes that are available for me, so I'm able to sort of bring in a much more comprehensive set of filter options that I had within the old Logic EXS sampler. I can select resonance if I want to, and I can create envelope depth and actually map this filter to an envelope, and the envelope shape is down here. So we get some nice bites, and the drive control is nice as well, particularly if we select a harder filter type or a deeper one. We get all this extra really nice control on these sounds. We can begin to shape them in the way that we might want. Let's turn the filter off for a second. We've also got an amp as well. So again, if I wanted to, I could make everything a little bit tighter by taking sustain down to 0. We'll have some very short little hits now, and then we could introduce decay time. So if I wanted some punchier hits, then I could do that as well. So Quick Sampler is a really nice way of getting up and running very quickly, just to allow you to import audio and begin to make sounds with it. And if you're importing melodic material, then it will actually look for crossfades for you and create loops for you as well. So if you're bringing in a vocal sample, for instance, it will go looking and create fades, crossfades to allow you to make even sort of one-shot samples into loops, which is a really nice feature as well. Okay, so let's now have a look at the other sampler. Now, this one really is the replacement for the EXS24, and a lot of people are well used to using it and will be concerned that the new interface looks very different and behaves a little bit differently. But let's just deal with a few things first. The first thing to say is that Sampler, as it's now called, is both forwards and backwards compatible with the EXS24. If you save a sampler instrument, it still has the .exs tag, which means that not only can you open your old samples within the new sampler interface, you can also send sampler projects to people who are maybe not yet updated to the latest version of Logic, and they will open in the EXS24. So everyone can take a deep breath and a big sigh of relief as far as that's concerned. It's fair to say that whilst lots of us who are Logic users have got very used to working with the EXS24, it's definitely beginning to show its age and has certainly had some limitations compared to some of the third-party samplers that are out there on the market. And I think that actually Sampler is a significant update which is going to feel a bit more modern and certainly is going to allow you to do some much more interesting things than you could do before. So first of all, let's just have a quick look around the interface. What we've got now effectively is a sort of modular setup. We've got these 5 tabs across the top, and I can switch those on and off just to allow me to see the bits of the interface that I want to work with. So here's the synth section, which you can see straight away has got 2 filters rather than the EXS24's 1. Again, these are Alchemy's filters borrowed into this new sampler interface, and they sound better and allow you to do more things than before. We can switch the filters on. You can see that it's possible to run them either in series or parallel mode. And if we select this option here, then of course what we have a chance to do is to blend between the two and make the settings and the choices that we want, again, from this comprehensive list of modes that are available. What we then got is the mod matrix. This was maybe the bit that everyone found most confusing in the EXS24, and a lot of people actually ignored it altogether. But this, I think, will be more familiar to most people. So we've just looked at Quick Sampler. This is a more extended version of the same idea. What we've got here is a chance to choose the source that we want to use, maybe an envelope to apply to a filter. So here's our source and here's our target. Here you can select the amount, including negative amounts, which means that any shape that you select will effectively play back upside down. Imagine, for example, you are mapping an LFO with a ramp shape. Well, that ramp would be inverted if you used a negative value. And again, we have a chance here to set up the via control, so we can map a controller to select the amount and how it's applied to anything we set from a source and target point of view. So that's the mod matrix. Of course, in order to use the modulators, we need actually to have access to what they are and what they look like. And you can see that what's amazing here is that we've got up to 5 envelopes and 5 LFOs available to us. So what we can do is we can select more of these. We can keep adding until we've got more. And you can see that the interface builds to show us the envelopes and LFOs that we might want. So as we click plus, new ones are added. So we've got a really comprehensive group of modulators available to us to allow us to then use the mod matrix to route those where we want to. For now, let's turn those two things off, because the crucial thing is going to be mapping. Now, again, what's really interesting about the way that Apple have redesigned Sampler is that not only is it possible to map in the ways that we're used to within the XS24, there is some AI learning going on here as well. So, in other words, what we have a chance to do is to map samples with the sampler, making some value judgments about the incoming audio. I'll show you what I mean. What I'm going to do is just go to the Finder for a second. I've got a sample of some flugelhorn played by a good friend of mine who sent me one long file of one note played after another. Those samples aren't mapped, they aren't broken up into individual notes, it's just one long file. So what we're going to do is see whether or not Logic can read that file and map it appropriately. So when I go to the Finder window and go and find the file that I'm talking about, what can happen when I bring this into Logic is that I can drop it into these two options here. So in other words, I can come into chromatic mapping, which is what we're used to in the XS24, which basically maps keys from C2 upwards. It's going to use the original looping, length, tuning, and loudness. Or I can come to optimized, and what this is going to do is it's going to analyze the pitch of the incoming file. It's going to get rid of any silence. It's going to search for loop points. It's going to optimize the tuning and the loudness. So when I drop this here, I can either create one zone per file. So in other words, my long file will be mapped onto one zone, or I can create a zone per note, which means that it's going to look, Sampler is going to look at this file, detect the pitch of each individual note, and hopefully map that to the right key on the keyboard. Let's see. So when I drop this, it imports the file and has a look. And you can see that straight away what's happened is that it's mapped all of the detected pitches. The lowest one that it's analyzed, it's then run all the way downwards from that point across the keyboard. And the highest one, it's mapped all the way upwards. So that one might not sound quite so great, but the individual ones in between should be mapped nicely now to my keyboard. And you can see if I play one note, not only has it analysed that note and found its pitch, what it's also done is to create a loop for me automatically. We can see within this window, it's found a start point and it's found an end point, but it's also found a loop. Let's listen to whether or not it loops nicely. Not bad. So this is a pretty massive development, really, because it's going to make the creation of musical instruments out of groups of sounds really deep and really comprehensive. It's going to allow us to turn sounds into instruments really quickly. And of course, what it means is that it's possible now to make recordings of instruments one note at a time, rather than necessarily having to chop them up into their individual bits and ask Logic to do that for us. I don't suppose for a second it's going to be a completely perfect system. However, it's a really nice, quick way of being able to get up and running. Now, the sampler goes a lot deeper than this overview that we're looking at today, and some crucial new elements have come in. So for people who are looking to do deep multi-sampling of instruments, you'll be pleased to hear, for instance, that we now have an option to use round robins within Sampler in a way that was never possible within the XS24. So in other words, what we can do is to record the same note on a piano or a music box or any instrument that you might want to sample, record multiple versions of the same note, and use round robins to cycle through those so that we don't get the machine gunning effect that we have from multiple triggers of the same key. And that's available to us within the groups now within Logic. So here we can see the individual zones, the same mapping that we're used to in the XS24. You can see how these individual samples have been analyzed and how they've been mapped and what their original pitch is and what key range they're playing over. But within the groups, we now have various options as well to allow us to come in and sort of control how those individual zones are managed at a group level. And here we can come through and see view, and within here you can see that what we've got is the opportunity to use round robins. Not relevant in the case that this particular sample, because there are no round robins. Each note has been recorded once, but that's a significant thing that we'll have a chance to dive into in more depth further on. So the XS24 is gone as we understand it. It's not called that anymore, it's just called Sampler. However, as an extension, as a sort of rebuilding of what's possible, this is an amazingly powerful instrument, and it's one that we're going to be able to dive into to look at various functions, I think, and find that it's an incredibly rich environment for the creation of new musical instruments.